Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is defined as the market value of all the final products produced in the domestic economy in a given year. It's important to note that we only look at things that are exchanged in the market, so non-market activities like you cooking in your home will not be counted. We also only look at final product, so intermediate goods, which are goods that are used to produce other things. For example, flours that are purchased by a bakery to bake a cake will not be counted. By product, we mean both physical goods and services, and we'll only look at things that are produced in the domestic economy, regardless of who produces them, and at a given period of time. So GDP is measured every 3 months or every quarter, and once again at the end of the year. So bearing that definition in mind, what should be included in GDP for the United States in 2019? Look at each of these items, then stop the video and decide whether they should or should not be counted based on the definition above. Babysitting for a neighbor in 2019. This one is a little tricky. The answer is no. Not because babysitting is not a valuable economic activity, it's a valuable service, but in all likelihood, if you babysit for a neighbor, you probably never report your earning to the IRS, and therefore, your earning will not be counted. How about a haircut given in 2019 in the United States? Again, pause the video. The answer is yes. Both physical goods and services like getting a haircut or getting your taxes done are counted as part of GDP, as long as they're produced in the domestic economy and produced that year. How about a Japanese car like a Honda Accord that's produced in Ohio? Will we count that in the US GDP for 2019 or not? The answer is yes. Anything produced in the domestic economy will be counted, regardless if it's produced by an American company or a foreign company. Similarly, we will not count American goods that are produced outside the US border. For instance, if Ford, an automaker, had a car manufacturing plant in Germany, you would not count the cars they produce in Germany in the US GDP. How about an antique clock? Maybe something that was made in the 1930s that was sold in 2019. Would you count it or not? The answer is no. We only count products when they're produced. Otherwise, we would end up counting the same product twice or more. How about a truck that was built in 2019 but was not sold until 2020? The answer to that is yes. We count the product when it's produced and not when it's sold. So even though the product was not sold in 2019, it was produced in 2019 and therefore will be counted in the 2019 GDP. Let me add one more example. Okay. What about flour that you purchase to make a cake? Will be counted or not counted? The answer to that is, surprising for some people, yes. Remember earlier I mentioned that if a bakery buys flour, it's considered intermediate good, it will not be counted. However, if you buy flours and eggs to produce a cake for yourself, you are the final consumer, and therefore we will count that as well in GDP. There are two approaches to measure GDP. One of them is called the expenditure approach. The expenditure approach says that GDP equals consumption, C is for consumption, plus gross investment, so I stands for gross investment, plus G for government spending, plus net export. These four spending are essentially the spending by the four sectors in the economy. We have the household sector, which include consumers. We have the business sectors, which is all businesses, companies that produce things, and that is gross investment. You have the public sector, which is the federal, state, and local governments, and that is essentially government spending. And finally, you have the international sector, which buys and sells things. So any foreigners are part of the international sector, and that is X minus M. X stands for export, which is goods that are produced in the United States but sold abroad, and M stands for import, which are goods that are produced outside the United States but purchased here. As a note, gross investment, or I, equal net investment, which is buying brand new capital, plus depreciation, which is investing money to replace or to repair capital, machines, and tools that worn down. The other approach to measure GDP is called the income approach. While the expenditure approach measured the total money spent by the four sectors in the economy: consumption for households, gross investment for businesses, government spending for the public sector, and net export, or export minus import for the international sector. The income approach measured the income that is received from selling those final goods and services. And that income gets distributed to what we call the factor of production. The different groups are responsible for producing the good. Using the income approach, the biggest component of GDP is worker compensation, which includes not only the salaries, but also fringe benefit, like contributing to a 401k plan, which is a retirement plan, or contributing to the workers' health insurance. The government also takes indirect taxes in addition to the income and payroll taxes that they take out of workers' comp. If companies have loans, they have to pay interest on that loan. So part of the income that's generated from selling goods and services goes as net interest, mostly to banks that make loans to businesses. Companies also have to invest in repairing and replacing equipment and tools, which is called, again, depreciation. And after the company generates its revenue, pays its workers, pays the government, pays the bank if it owns any loans, and covers depreciation, they have profit left. But there are two types of profit. For businesses that are owned directly either by individual or partners, we call that profit proprietor income. For corporations that are owned by shareholders, we call that profit corporate profit. Now let's look at GDP using the expenditure approach by looking at a specific problem. If consumption is 240 billion, net investment is 15 billion, government spending is 60 billion, depreciation is 75 billion, taxes are 45 billion, net export is 10 billion, and imports is 30 billion. What does GDP equal? And you'll be using the expenditure approach to measure GDP. And what is export as percent of GDP? Please stop the video, solve both these problems, and click again on play when you have the answers. Using the expenditure approach, we know that GDP equals consumption, 240 billion, plus gross investment, which is net investment, 15 billion, plus depreciation. Together, it's 90 billion. Plus government spending, which is given to you as 60 billion, plus net export. Notice that net export is already given to you, so you do not need to subtract imports away. Also, taxes are not included in the equation, There's no reason to add them when you do the math. Adding these numbers, you get that GDP equals 400 billion. What about measuring GDP as a percent, export as a percent of GDP? Before I give you the answer, please make sure that you try it out, and once you solve it, press play again. To look at export, we have to recognize that net export of 10 billion equals export X minus import, which we know is 30 billion. We move the negative 30 billion to the other side, and we get that export equals 40 billion. When we want to do a percent calculation, we take the small number, divide by the bigger number, and multiply by 100%. In this case, export equals 40 billion out of 400 billion. The billions are going to be eliminated from both the numerator and the denominator. That's going to give us 0.1, or in percent, 10%. So the answer is 10%. Right? Great. Moving forward. When we look at GDP, we have to consider nominal and real GDP. Real GDP is adjusting for inflation. So what we really want to look at is the actual production. How much do we produce in the economy? And we want to take away any increase in prices, which is not a real change, but rather a nominal change. This leads us to the following equation. Real GDP equals nominal GDP, the dollar amount, divided by the GDP deflator. So the GDP deflator is a price index that deflates or take away any changes in prices. For example, if between 2000 and 2010, price increased by 8%, the GDP deflator would be 1.08. 1 represents no change. The 0.08 means an 8% increase. Similarly, if the price increased by 20%, the GDP deflator would be 1.20, with the 0.20 representing a 20% increase. So let's look at this problem below. In 2008, nominal GDP was 12 trillion, and real GDP was 10 trillion. What was GDP deflator? Again, stop the video, solve this, and when you're ready, come back and look at the answer. Assuming that you solve the problem, the answer is as follows. We're going to take the equation above, real GDP equals nominal GDP, divide by the GDP deflator, and we're just going to move the GDP deflator from the right to the left, right? And then move real GDP from the top of the left to the bottom of the right. You may remember from math, this is known as cross multiplying. So therefore, the GDP deflator equals 12 trillion divided by 10 trillion. The trillions, of course, disappear from the top and the bottom, and the answer is 1.2 trillion. Finally, we need to recognize that real GDP per capita, or real GDP per person, is often used to compare the welfare of different countries. Real GDP per capita provides essentially the average income, or the income per resident, both working and non-working. Although it provides some information on social welfare, or how well we do, there are other things besides real GDP per capita that we need to look at when we compare the welfare or the well-being of different countries. Stop the video and think of other things besides average income that may matter to individuals living in a specific country. So for example, longevity, how long people live. Add more things to that list and then come back and click on the video again. Assuming that you create that little list, here's some things to think about. Real GDP per capita, or average income, does not measure non-market activity. Especially in developing or relatively poor countries, there's a lot of non-market activities. People do a lot of things to support themselves, and that does not get counted. We also don't count environmental quality. For instance, China has had tremendous growth since the 1980s, but it came at a substantial environmental cost with air and water pollution. Other things like crime, longevity, and other indicators of social welfare are also not included in real GDP. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and if you have any questions, you can always email me at yoav@coastal.edu. Have a good day.